Hello, welcome back to Sextras.
Where we talk about sex and all the extras.
I'm Honey.
And I'm Maria.
And welcome to our masculinity miniseries.
Oh yeah. It's just been Halloween, so we just wanted to spook you.
Jump scare! What a surprise. Honey and Maria are acknowledging that men exist. Yay. Yeah, this is the first episode of our masculinity miniseries. We wanted to talk about masculinity, whether it's kind of like a fair, I feel like men have a bad reputation right now, which...
Yeah. And I feel like we also...
give them a bad reputation.
We're not giving it to them. Like, they did that all by themselves.
Yeah.
But I do feel like we talk about men not that nicely sometimes on the podcast. And I mean, not that this is even just to talk about men necessarily. We want to talk about masculinity, just, like more as a concept as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what is masculinity?
Exactly.
Do we know?
Spoiler alert, that we don't have any conclusion, no answer to this question, by the way. I feel like I've just ended up more confused as to what I think masculinity is.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I feel like every time you hear about masculinity, it's like toxic masculinity, or at least in like the world that we're in and like our friends and our generation. And we did a little survey and stuff. It was mostly Gen Z, and I feel like Gen Z in particular is very aware of like gender dynamics and like gender being a concept and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that we don't still like uphold, the differences between masculinity and femininity and between like men and women as well. And so yeah, we kind of wanted to like explore what masculinity means in this little survey. We're gonna do several episodes in this mini series, and yeah, just kind of like a precursor. I guess it doesn't look great for the first couple of episodes, like the research we've done, the people we've spoken to, the general vibe is not looking great for men and masculinity. Just not even to conflate them, just generally both aren't seeming great. But then we're hoping to get a little bit more positive towards the end of the mini series as well, so it's not all going to be doom and gloom.
Yeah, and we're hoping to get some more guests to come on and talk to us a little bit more about their thoughts and experiences, but we've already recorded like an episode already, and that was pretty positive. And anyway, so tune in, guys. We will sort of bring in some positivity and like hopefully sort of shift our minds and attitudes slightly as we go along about what masculinity is and whether that should be seen as a negative thing, and whether we can do anything to sort of move away from that perception.
Yeah, and I feel like even just like the research we've done, obviously we'll get into that in a second, like the fact that it's so obvious that people know that gender is kind of a construct, I feel like that is a big step in itself, you know what I mean? Like that wasn't the case, I don't know, maybe like 30 years ago or whatever. And I do think our generation is very aware of trying to be mindful when we're talking about concepts like masculinity and stuff. And in some cases as well, we should point out that like masculinity will be conflated with men, because that is still very much the case in society and stuff, but like that's not necessarily what we think. But we'll also dive into what we think. Okay, anything you want to say before we get into this?
No, I think let's dive in.
Okay, cool. So we did a survey and I had lots of feedback on my survey. People saying that it was too long, and I'm sorry, but it means we have all these answers to share with you now. So yeah, the survey was, what is masculinity in 2023? That's what we were trying to figure out. There were 20 respondents, probably because it was too long and everyone kept telling me that they kept starting it. and then not finishing it because, as you will see when we get into it, the answers are really long, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, so 85% of the respondents were 18 to 25, 10% were 25 to 34, 5% were 45 to 54. Yeah. 60% were female, 5% non-binary, and 35% male. 60% were straight, 25% bi or pan, 5% lesbian, 5% polysexual, 5% queer. So that gives you an idea of who's talking in this survey. And then we asked, like, what comes to mind when you think of masculinity? Maria, what comes to mind for you?
What comes to mind for me? Yeah, like closed off with emotions, logical and rational kind of vibes. Like leads with, yeah, like logic and reason rather than with emotion.
Yeah.
I guess like, yeah, like assertive and, yeah, sort of like whatever comes out my mouth, it's like gold kind of vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, confidence. I said that already, didn't I? Aggressiveness, like, I don't know, I think of like macho kind of culture. Not culture, I don't know. Is it a culture? Is macho-ness a culture?
I don't know. Yeah, like, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, when I think of masculinity, I definitely think of like men, for sure. But I guess if I'm like, okay, if I'm like trying to think of it in the context of a woman, so it's like not doesn't have to be like a necessarily male thing. I guess I think of like more like physical attributes when I think about it in women rather than like personality, because I do feel like if like women behave in a masculine way, I don't see it as like, oh, that's like really masculine. I just see like, oh, that's like a really like confident kind of girl, or like she's like, oh, she's like really logical. I never think like, oh, she's like really like manly. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just haven't met many manly women, or I don't know. I don't know. I find it really hard to separate this conversation from like, I guess, yeah, like men, like the binary of men, women, and like what those norms are.
Yeah. I think like what came out in the survey as well is like, if you have a really positive example of masculinity in your life that isn't, you know, like the traditional toxic presentation of masculinity in men, then you're more likely to be like, okay, yeah, I think masculinity can be a positive thing. Whereas I feel like, not that I don't have positive examples of men in my life, because I do, but I still think that they're quite traditionally masculine. But that doesn't mean that they're the reason that I don't necessarily, spoiler alert, think of masculinity in like a positive way. It's more just, I feel like I've encountered way more negative examples of masculinity than I have of positive. And I don't know what that says about me, that I like am focusing on the negative, because I feel like the positive examples that I've have been quite like notable and like big roles in my life. But
what's like an example of positive masculinity in your life that you can think of?
Like my granddad and like my uncle.
But like what kind of like specific,
like what are the traits?
Yeah.
I feel like they're like caring and like inquisitive, and I don't know, I don't think compared to other people they're like dominating and like think they're better than me, or like think what they have to say is better than me. But in some instances that is also true of them, you know what I mean? Like sometimes they can be like that.
Yeah.
But also so can like everyone in my family, so then I think that I just think of it as more of like a patriarchal thing than necessarily like a masculine thing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think as well. It's like, I don't really think like, I think of specific traits as like, oh, that's so masculine or that's so feminine. I just think of it as like, yeah, in patriarchal terms, like stuff that may come out, you know,
Yeah.
or like, yeah, behaviors that may occur more often in like women versus men because of like just the whole society and like everything that happens and the way everything's structured.
Yeah, like so like pick me girls, I feel like that's become such a trope in recent years, but I don't think like, oh, they're so masculine, you know what I mean? I feel like the reason that conversation has become such a big thing is because people recognize that they're kind of like indoctrinated by the patriarchy, you know what I mean, rather than like, oh, they're trying to be masculine. It's like, oh, they think that like the patriarchal divide of genders, or like how a woman should be for a man, or like trying to relate to masculine tropes is the goal. It's so complicated. It's literally giving me a headache already. Yeah.
It's just so embedded. It's like, it's, yeah, I don't know, it's really hard to have a conversation about it in a way, because it's really hard to sort of separate all the like subconscious and like all the shit that's like really, really ingrained, and versus like free will and choices and like the person that you actually are, or the person like, yeah, who people actually are.
Yeah, I feel like my perception of masculinity is like something that I'm kind of scared of as well, or like don't have the best associations with, not just in other people but also like in myself. Like I feel like I don't want to be perceived as masculine and I love being perceived as feminine and like hyper femme, and like I don't know, I feel like femininity is such a fun performance for me. So then I feel like because of that I kind of shy away from being perceived as masculine. But I also think that probably quite like naturally from my family I have like some more masculine traits as well. And I do think that I have like assertive traits in some instances, but I also think that I feel like, oh, I can't say certain things or like, you know, talk at certain moments because of the like patriarchal setup of my family, if that makes sense, not to get too deep into my family dynamics. So should we talk about the kind of like words that people associate with masculinity? We kind of sorted them into like good, bad and neutral. So for good, it was like protective, caring, thoughtful, honest, open,
Leader,
yeah, protectiveness,
assertiveness,
a strong provider, sacrifice, determination. Yeah, like a lot of recurring words basically, which is interesting. And I feel like they're all very like strength and confidence based and like power based. And then for bad we had like aggressive, combative, objectifying women, being disrespectful, ignorant,
not showing emotions, being a bit stoic, not doing cleaning or cooking.
Yeah, 5-in-1 body wash. Scary, less responsible, closed off, defensive, macho, anger. I don't know, I feel like that's so interesting because strength and like that kind of descriptor and then aggressiveness, I feel like those two go so hand in hand, and it's kind of like flip of the switch kind of thing in my mind, like it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, as well as like the assertiveness and like the confidence, then yeah, if it's bad, it can turn really ugly.
And I think it's such a thing of perception, because I think in my mind, obviously, I have such a preconceived notion that men are just like masculinity, macho masculinity is super negative. So if I perceive a man to be like super confident and assertive and these things that people are describing as positive, I automatically interpret it as like assertiveness and like domination and like aggressiveness, and I just think like, why the fuck are you talking over me, or why are you explaining this point to me, you know what I mean, as opposed to like, oh, they're so confident, like they know what they're talking about.
That's really interesting. I feel like I really see it as like a really positive thing, because I feel like kind of in the words that I was using to describe like masculinity and stuff before we sort of started reading these out, it's like, because I kind of perceive like femininity, or like at least myself, it's kind of like a really like driven by emotions, versus men like really not. I see it as like a good kind of thing to be able to like, you know, be assertive, be like really confident and like rational and all those things.
Yeah, I don't know, it is so interesting. Oh, I also want to say, like, I do fully think that gender is a concept. Like, I feel like we should have said that at the start. But, like, just to clarify, I don't think that, like, anyone is inherently masculine or inherently feminine. Like, I think it's all learned. And I also think we all have like elements of both in all of us, which so many people said in the survey, and that was just making me think, like, do people think that I don't think that? And they're like, I don't know. Anyway, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's really important. Like, energy, not energy. Masculinity and femininity is like, yeah, anyone can be both and neither. And I also agree with you that I think everyone has a little bit of both, and neither of them to me is like a bad thing. I think it's just all the construct of it that makes it either a bad or a good thing. Yeah,
and like our perception of it based on the people we associate with masculinity and like the people we associate with femininity. Like obviously incels and stuff like associate femininity with something that's super bad, you know what I mean? And I feel like that's kind of what we're trying to get at, is these like two extremes of viewing the concepts in really negative ways, and how dangerous those two sides can be, and like how we can meet in the middle and stuff. Anyway, so then neutral people people said such funny things. Simple creatures / Yogi Bear. What? Do you think
Yogi Bear is
Bear
so masculine
when you think of masculinity?
Yeah, honestly.
What? Simple creatures. They're like primitive. And yeah, people said like tough, deep voiced, penis, height, tech and electrics.
So fair, yeah.
Yeah. Think of like cars and horses. Okay, so yeah, that was a fun word association game. And then like we wanted to read some like notable quotes people said. Someone said, I always think of those Stone Island lads that, like that pic of the 4 dons in Newcastle in jeans and shoes with no socks, probably idolized Tommy Shelby or something.
Someone else said, I normally think of toxic masculinity first.
Yeah. Someone said, sometimes brusque but with a hidden tender side. Realistically, I think of mask lesbians with carabiners and tattoos. Honestly, slay.
And then someone else said, I think masculinity has changed over the years, but I think now masculinity to me means someone who identifies as a man and that embraces their emotions and is able to respect women and sees everyone as equal and not women as inferior.
Yeah.
A real man.
A real man, for sure. But, like, realistically, that's just not what I think of when I think of masculinity.
Yeah, I mean, in movies and stuff, like, when they're like, be a real man. Like, sometimes it's like, you know, like, go tell, like, your girl the truth, you know? Be a real man. Like, act, like ethically and accordingly to like other people's emotions, be like considerate of other people's emotions. So I think that even though like in a lot of ways we do associate a lot of like bad stuff with masculinity, in the end, this is kind of what I think, is like masculinity is like kind of like whatever you think it is and like want it to be, and I feel like to be a good man or like a good woman and all of that shit, it is just to like, you know, be kind, act ethically, like all those things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, then we asked, what does masculinity mean to you? Less than half of the people said negative, which is good. What does masculinity mean to you? Is it like a part of your identity?
No. Like, I don't know. I don't. As I said, I just really feel like I don't think of traits and things like that as like inherently masculine or feminine. I don't really think of myself as like masculine at all. But I also am not like, oh, I'm like the most feminine person ever. I don't know. To me, it's just like whatever. Like, you know, it doesn't really matter that much. But I feel like that's also like a privileged kind of position, you know. I can understand that there are a lot of people that like do. I'm saying like it's privileged because I'm like, yeah, I can like wear like baggy clothes or like, I don't know, do things that and I might think or other people might think are like masculine, and it doesn't really like mean anything or say anything about like, yeah, my identity or how feminine or masculine I am ultimately. It's just kind of like, yeah, that's just another thing. Whereas, for instance, like I can imagine someone who's like non-binary or like transgender, like especially or something like that. You have to like counteract and kind of examine that really strongly. And like, for instance, yeah, like something as simple as like wearing a baggy jumper or something like that can have like a bigger implication. But yeah, I really don't know, but I do feel like definitely like more feminine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, what does masculinity mean to you? I'm feeling really like puzzled.
Yeah, I also, it's never really like a conscious thing of like, oh, I'm, you know, like embracing my masculine side, but I kind of just don't think that that's how most people think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and as exactly as you're saying, unless like your assigned gender at birth is like not how you identify, you know, like I think it's definitely like a cis privileged kind of thing and like a very heteronormative thing of like placing these two things in opposition with each other, whereas like most of the queer people that I know, I feel like play with masculinity and femininity quite a lot, even if they're like cis identifying. And yeah, like for me, I don't know, I do feel like I'm not super wed to the idea of a woman, you know what I mean? And I feel like that wouldn't really make any difference to my life because of how I think about gender. And I feel like my thought processes day to day aren't like, oh, I'm a woman, so I have to do that. Whereas I feel like from the conversations I've had like leading up to this miniseries, a lot of the thought processes men have, not to generalize, but just from what the conversations I've had, are around like, oh, that's not like the man thing to do, so I'm not going to do that. Like, oh, it's not the man thing to talk to my friends about my feelings, so I'm not going to do that. And like, you know, these certain attributes that is not in line with being a man. And I don't really feel that as a woman in terms of femininity and being a woman.
Yeah, I mean, someone in the survey said that they feel that, yeah, like women are a lot more allowed almost to embrace like a masculinity or their masculine side, and men just are not. It's like definitely not as open for them to embrace like their feminine side and those kinds of things. But and then equally, I feel like a lot of the people in the survey, though, like a lot of the women in the survey, straight women in the survey or whatever, like they were expressing that feminine, like more feminine traits in men are like really attractive and things like that. So I don't know, it's like really weird. Like I feel like this pressure is mostly coming from men though, rather than women. Obviously women are upholding these like standards as well, for sure, but yeah, I don't know, I do feel like it comes more from men.
And I think it's such a straight dynamic, like a straight relationship dynamic of like women second guessing what men find attractive and men second guessing what women find attractive, and there being some kind of like mismatch in between where things get lost in translation. Because like from my perspective, well, I don't really care what men find attractive, obviously, but but I think that what men think women find attractive is not at all what I find attractive. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
But it's obviously such a personal thing. Like, some women do find that attractive and some don't. But I feel like just the generalization of what makes you an attractive, insert your gender here kind of thing, is so lost in translation. Anyway, it's not relevant at all. That was such a
sorry,
segue.
I took us on a bit of a tangent there. I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine. I feel like I did too. So
should we see what masculinity means to a few of the survey responders?
Yes, definitely. So someone said, for me personally, embracing a level of masculinity has helped me support others, which I feel like is interesting.
Yeah, and someone else said, I find it positive mostly, but the extremities that masculinity has taken to make it toxic to live around and with.
Someone said, I fear being perceived as masculine and have done for most of my life. At the same time, it can be really exciting and sexy to both behold and express from time to time. I agree. I feel like it's just like one of those things that you know, like if you're in the mood, it can be like quite fun to play around with, personally for me.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I just have nothing against like being masculine, but it's like I just don't really know what that means. Do you know what I mean? Like I just don't know what it would mean to like I can't picture like embracing these parts of myself and feeling more sexy, because it's like what does that mean? Yeah. I don't know. I just like feel, but I do feel like when I do feel most sexy, I'm not being particularly masculine, to be fair.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, like I don't have, I don't know. Anyway.
But I feel like what this person is referring to is like the performance of traditional masculinity rather than like what you perceive as masculine. That's how I interpret it.
Right.
Anyway. But that might not be what they meant. Sorry if that's not what you meant.
Someone else said, I actually believe I have a masculine energy being a girl, and I think I couldn't be more feminine in the way I look. Interesting.
Yeah. Someone said they have a positive like relationship with masculinity because they think that it's like someone who knows their place and understands their duties to others.
Yeah,
Thoughts
I don't know.
on that?
To me, yeah. So you're like, well,
struggling.
Well, you know what? I don't know. It's just, to me, that's like a feminine kind of vibe to me, but maybe not. Femininity and masculinity can be anything.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. Next one.
Someone else said, when I think about positive versions of masculinity, I tend to think about women/non-binary people harnessing elements of masculinity. So cool, calm, uber confidence, feeling assured in yourself and your decisions, being assertive, going after what you want. When people alongside / balanced against more feminine traits of, for instance, care, compassion for others, affection, I think it makes a strong balance. But when it's too far one side, I think of hypermasculinity. I feel scared and intimidated, especially thinking about aggressive or violent, repressive versions of masculinity in cis men. So, yeah, I like this idea of kind of what we've been saying, that we feel like men and women both have feminine and male traits, and like having this idea of balance, and when it just goes to like the extreme, then that view can become a bit negative, which I feel like is very fair. Like I think everything in extremities is just not ideal.
Yeah. And then someone said their relationship with masculinity is neutral. They like being a strong provider but don't like the expectation. And then kind of something that came up a lot in the other answers we got was that patriarchy and masculinity as the ideal is harmful for like both men and women. So again, what you're saying, if it's too far to one side, then it's kind of scary for everyone involved. Yeah, so then we asked, what role does masculinity play in your personal identity? Is it a big or a small role? How does it present itself? I feel like we already answered this question, Loki, in the last one. I kind of forgot what I asked in the survey, not gonna lie, so sorry about that. But yeah, what people said, the first person said, I like being masculine and I feel sexy when I present as masculine and feminine and can play with the androgyny of both. And like it presents itself in how they dress and liking more stereotypically masculine things. Yeah.
Yeah. And then someone else said that masculinity is something that they encounter a lot online, and like, for example, at a pub when a football match is on, that they've gotten into fights with guys who are definitely trying to prove their masculinity. And that made us think about how the pub is the masculine vibes at the pub.
Yeah, well, I've spoken to so many people recently, as in when I say so many people, I mean like the 3 men that I speak to on a regular basis about how all they do with their friends is go to the pub and get drunk, and they don't do anything else. Like, they never do anything that doesn't involve drinking. But we'll get into that in our next episode, which is going to be about male friendships. But yeah, interesting that came up again. Yeah, and the same person said the other thing is in sexual life it sometimes presents, for example, in roles, talks with people about size, impotence, how long someone lasts, etc., all about manhood. Yeah, interesting
for sure. I mean, I do see how like the idea of masculinity or like being a man would play a big part in, yeah, like I feel like sex is a big part of those kinds of things of like, oh, be a man.
Yeah. And because like how we're taught about sex is so heteronormative. It's like who's on top, like who's top and who's bottom, even in gay relationships, you know, and it's like, why do we have to do that? Anyway, yeah, someone said a large part of my experience coming out to myself and to others as a gay woman is realising how much I've suppressed my own feelings of masculinity. A somewhat balanced identity of masculinity and femininity lies within my own body. To please others and fit into society's expectations that women ought to be weaker and softer. Embracing my own inner masculinity, which has always been present but used to make me feel ashamed, has been incredibly empowering, and now I actually view myself as equal to other people, whereas in the past, I suppose, hate to admit it, I considered myself lesser than men because, well, toxic masculinity ruins the party again. Yeah.
Okay, someone else said, it's a pressure on how to act, especially when around other men, which I think is quite an interesting thing that we were kind of talking about earlier as well, that maybe the pressure like comes more from other men than from other women.
Yeah, because I never feel like my female friends are holding me to like the standard of femininity, you know what I mean? Like if I'm not super girly or whatever, no one's gonna accept me.
Yeah.
Wait, do I? No, I don't.
No, I was gonna say that I do feel like, I don't know, for instance, like my mom or like older women in my life, I feel like do hold me or have held me to like a standard of femininity.
Someone said, it's something that lies beneath everything else and often helps me to get things done or behave in an admirable, noble fashion. All that man up stuff can be very helpful under the right circumstances. If I'm against the concept of manning up, then realistically I just need to man up. It's just a different version of grow up, and if I don't want to grow up, then I need to grow up. Yeah, okay. Valid.
Yes, and then someone else said that masculinity plays a small role in their life. They say, I sometimes feel as though it comes very naturally to me to act masculinely. Masculinely, is that a word? To act masculinely, but I fear people thinking of me as masculine, and so counteract it as much as possible by embracing the feminine part of myself. I was cast as boys in school plays at my all-girls schools, and I had an ex-girlfriend who compared me to a man once, and I think I still get a bit freaked out at the idea of people seeing me as manly. Go to therapy, girl.
Yeah. Yeah, someone said, I like to draw on elements of masculinity. When I'm doing something I'm scared to do, I remind myself to carry myself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. I also feel my most sexy when I dress / feel more masculine too, but again alongside femme attributes. It makes me feel powerful, confident and sexy.
Yeah, I like that. Embrace your inner white man. Don't give no shit.
Yeah.
Live your life. And then someone else said, I'm manly in a lot of ways, but was raised by a single mother, so not the most manly man.
Okay. And then the next question was whether people think the perception of masculinity in the general population is positive or negative. And it was quite like 50-50 between positive and negative, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And then one thing that we wanted to say that someone wrote was that I think that in America masculinity is often celebrated as a means of maintaining societal suppressors of women. As a woman with a buzz cut, I have had multiple men comment that not everyone could pull that off very hypocritically. Seeing as the men saying such things had the same haircut as me, they were implying that women ought to have longer hair. Like, Sarah, are you sure you can pull it off? How condescending and rude. The Barbie movie did an excellent job of exemplifying this.
Yeah, true. I mean, it is interesting, like, why, like, men can do certain things and women can't do the exact same thing because of, like, what it would say about them or whatever. Or,
but I feel like that goes to the same thing we were saying about, yeah, women can embrace, like, masculine sides of themselves more easily than men can embrace feminine sides of themselves.
Yeah, no, it's true.
And maybe, like, the appearance is the one. But I don't even think it is really that big of a deal, except maybe to do with hair, that men would point it out.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Or just, like, any man that does that is just a dick. Like, who does that?
Yeah, but I mean, I also feel like a lot of, like, I don't know, I'd never even thought about that, like, the whole, like, not many people could pull that off kind of thing. I feel like I would say that to someone that was, like, to a girl that was, like, telling me that they're gonna shave their head kind of vibe.
Yeah.
You know, I'd never really thought about it in...
Yeah, that's true, but I guess that's not because you're a man
sense.
and that's because you're not a man and you don't have a shaved head, so it's not like, you know.
Yeah, no, it's true.
The same thing. And then the next question was, do you feel that the perception is fair? Why or why not? And someone said a lot of masculinity is really performance, not an inherent badness. Yeah, which I feel like is what we've been saying. Yeah. And then
someone else said, it's also important to note that mask lesbians and mask non-binary people can also be misogynistic and uphold toxic masculinity. Definitely do not get a free pass by flashing the gay card. I've heard some heinously sexist statements from queer women, and I think that they don't think misogyny applies to them, or that they're removed from that world so they can treat women badly. You're not. Do better.
I so agree with that. I've heard some, like, very homophobic, biphobic, misogynistic things said by gay women, and I feel like it kind of goes hand in hand with that. You know how, like, queer people kind of play more with, like, masculinity and femininity, you know, like the balance of that. And then I feel like in part of that performance, sometimes that brings the misogynistic kind of mindset because you're trying to embrace, like, the traditionally masculine vibe.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think, and even, like, beyond, like, queer women, I feel like I even, like, in general dating and things like that, like, I feel like I give women so many more free passes than men on the same exact behaviour.
Yeah.
Even sometimes, you know, that is like misogynistic behavior, or like even just like treating someone badly. And I feel like with women I'm like, oh yeah, but like there's this reason, and like I understand it, and like, oh yeah, but like she feels so bad, like forgive her.
Yeah.
Whereas like if it's the same thing with a man, I'd just be like, oh no, like that's trash, like they'll never change, like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, I just feel like I am definitely guilty of like almost like giving women a bit more of the benefit of the doubt in these kinds of things, and
no, so true.
sort of like, yeah, and upholding that like idea of toxic masculinity even further.
Yeah, and because we were talking about it the other day, like if a girl off a dating app, or like just a girl that I'm dating, was, you know, being shitty to me or whatever, like for example, like I was literally just not even seeing this girl, but then she kind of acted as if she was interested, and then all of a sudden turned around and was like, oh no, I'm not, this isn't right, blah blah blah. And I feel like for her, I was able to be like, oh no, it's fine, you know, she's just avoidant, and I can see her whole thought process behind it, because I feel like you're saying I'm able to give way more empathy to women, because I have other friends who've, like female friends who've probably been through the same thing, and I can think exactly what their thought process was, because I've lived that thought process either with them or myself. Whereas if a man does that, because men don't really talk about their feelings as much to me, I'm like, no, that's trash, that just came out of nowhere, like fuck them, why are they acting like that? And it's yeah, you just don't afford men the same, I guess, grace,
like benefit of
of the doubt as women.
Yeah.
So yeah,
do better.
So true. And then someone said, yeah, in a way women are allowed to take on more masculine traits, at least in the professional sphere. I don't know about the home really, but men not too much, because it's rooted in misogyny at the end of the day, innit?
Yeah, this is the comment I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
About, yeah, how it's easier, but I mean, yeah, it does all just come back out. Femininity is trash, masculinity rules.
Yeah. But then, oh yeah, I also wanted to talk about how I saw this TikTok. I'll link it in the description because I can't remember who it was, but someone saying that like it's bullshit that masculinity is favored over femininity in society, which like, and basically their reasoning was because they were saying like in America especially, black men and like just people of color in America aren't treated with respect, even though they're like hyper masculinized and like over masculinized from a young age, like both gender, all genders, whatever. And that's like a trait that isn't respected in people of color. So I think it is like obviously more complex than just masculine is good, feminine is bad. And I also think recently we've had such a surge of femininity is amazing, you know, like with the Barbie movie and with Taylor Swift. Like everyone's obsessed with girlhood and being like part of the feminine kind of tribe. So I do think it's like way more complex obviously than we are making out, but this is the survey, what the survey is saying. Blame it on the survey. Yeah, and then last few ones.
Someone said that they think that it's fair because everything should be scrutinized at some point in time. I hope it won't remain as a perception and instead will boil down to neutrality. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's time to scrutinize masculinity after this whole time.
That's what we're doing here today. Someone said, no, people only look for the negatives in masculinity, never the positives, which again I kind of think is true. Like I feel like the positive elements of masculinity are just things that we perceive as feminine, you know what I mean, like talking about your feelings and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I do think it always is like kind of easier to think in extremes sometimes, you know, like you just like think of like kind of the worst thing, or like, yeah, you know. Yeah, and someone else said that no, it's fair because toxic men are the root of most societal problems.
True. And then someone said, another random thought, but it had a big effect on my life. I'm bi pansexual, but I stopped accepting men on my dating apps because I was scared of meeting up with them in real life. For me, I can't really dissociate that feeling of strangers' masculinity and danger or a need to protect myself from it. I'm much more trusting of it in friends or people I know, which again I feel like is true. I will get into this in the next episode, little teaser, but I feel like I am not attracted to men in a platonic way, really, and that kind of is part of like why I've been having this whole sexuality crisis, because the men that I've dated, I'm like, well, I would literally never be friends with them, but I would date them, so like what does that mean? We can't really be in a relationship because I don't even really like who they are as a person. But then I'm like, maybe I'm just a lesbian. So that's great. That's a fun dilemma.
This whole miniseries is just gonna end up always leading back to, yeah, maybe I'm just a lesbian.
Yeah, maybe I hate men and I'm just a big lesbian, which is great. But yeah, I also blocked men off my dating apps, and I feel like it was just such a better experience, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe we'll tell you guys in a little catch-up episode.
Stay tuned.
So you can find out the goss.
Yeah. But is there anything else you want to add to this what is masculinity in 2023? Do we have a conclusion?
I mean, I feel in conclusion, people are like kind of starting to like talk about this, question this, which I feel like ultimately is a good thing. I think the view seems to be like pretty negative, but there also seems to be kind of awareness about that and how that must not be like the full picture of reality, and we kind of need to like acknowledge a more whole picture. I feel but it is complicated. I feel like it's like really rooted in stuff that is like really hard to separate from like your own opinions, thoughts and everything versus indoctrination and just like living in society. So
yeah, and I also feel like there's such a disconnect between what people think they should think and like what they actually do think in their day-to-day life. Like obviously I am a prime example of that, and yeah, I feel like women are clearly aware of the fact that they shouldn't be holding men to these standards of masculinity, but then when it comes to like their dating lives and their family relationships and all their other relationships, they still hold men to those standards, you know what I mean, and like they still are attracted to those masculine traits. And I feel like it's separating the like expectation of other people and what you actually think like society would benefit from as a whole in a way. But yeah, those are my thoughts, and we'll be back next week with another episode about masculinity. We're going to talk about male friendships with other men, with women, with anyone basically. How men talk about their feelings, how they talk about sex, and all of those fun things. It's actually really not fun, it's really depressing. I've sent myself into a spiral about it, but we'll get into it next week. And yeah, you can find us and Sextras magazine, which launched yesterday, on Instagram at Sextras World. And
is that the final?
Yeah. And our new website, which is sextrasworld.com, and we're also on TikTok at the same handle, and you can send us your agony aunts, questions, queries, dilemmas, blah 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 blah, wherever all of those things can be found. And yeah, we'll be back in a week. See you soon.
Yeah, see you next week. Bye.
You've been listening to Sextras, presented by Honey Jane Wyatt and Maria Jose Hayodatiyi, produced by Mabel Productions.